Hello and welcome back to Modern Pharmacist with me, Lee Smith. Now, do you know that the average person globally is likely to have a reduced life expectancy secondary to air pollution rather than smoking? Now, that stat is actually real, and I'll get into why. And this podcast episode is mainly covering the environment, things that you don't normally, and me included, have never really thought of when it comes to how to enhance longevity. Because we normally, and I still advise this, is that we focus on diet, exercise, sleep, stress response, and management. And we rarely take too much emphasis on the environment. And I feel as though it's because normally people feel as though once you are in a certain place, then it's not really something that you can influence. But what I'm going to go through is air pollution, noise pollution, and light pollution, and just a few things that you could potentially do to enhance your health and not break the bank, but also to have a greater perspective on mechanisms in which they can cause bad health, but also how much should you be leveraging with regards to environmental pollution in regards to, or with regards to looking at your lifestyle and other things that I've mentioned before. So I'm going to start with air pollution because I feel as though this is the one that has the greatest impact on your health. And looking through it, going back before I started this episode, because it's something I've never really looked into, I was not skeptical, but it took me a long time to go through all the studies and try and see, can I put this across in a convincing way that other people are going to take some benefit from? But air pollution has been around for obviously years, and people have been conscious of it for years. So it started back in Egyptian philosophy, actually probably before then, but Egyptian philosophy is like the first time. Then I believe King Edward the First, I think it was. I'm not the best with royalty or monarchs. He then put in a ban for coal burning in the 1300s, which was largely not listened to because no one else had real anything to use as a fuel to heat the homes, etc. And then back in the 1950s, there was the London smog, which I think at the time the average death toll in London was about 1,800 people per month, I think it was. And then this crept up to 4,500. And then in a few months after it, they believed that about 12,000 people had died as a result of the London smog. And I think it was like 5 days. So that then led to the Air Pollution Act. Again, I'm not the best with this, but this was 1956. And this was like the first real lawful enforcement with regards to cleaning up the environment. And then since then, we've obviously gone towards these more carbon neutral programs. And looking into the UK in particular, I was looking into something where it said that the UK's pollution towards the global economy and environment was 1%. So actually what we're doing in the UK probably has a little effect in comparison to looking at countries such as China, India, etc., who have a large industrial presence and haven't really changed much of their practice going forward. Well, one thing I want you to think about before we go into these is that when you have a medication, for example, and you want to see the effect of something, so does paracetamol improve your pain response over placebo? It's quite easy to do. You can get two groups of people, one with paracetamol, one without. You can largely keep a lot of their things the same. So the same type of pain stimulus, which could be a fractured ankle, for example, they all have the same diets, they all have the same dosing regime, all these things that you can monitor and manage. And then you can actually say, well, paracetamol had a reduced pain score in comparison to placebo. So there's a good chance that that worked. When it comes to the environment, it's quite hard to ethically and also from a confounding factor point of view to isolate certain things. And what I mean by that is if you were looking at the effects of living near a motorway with regards to air pollution from exhaust fumes and seeing if that has a detrimental effect on your health, you can't put someone like a few families near a motorway bridge for 25 years and people in the countryside because it's unethical, because there's a good chance that we know there's a pathophysiology there. We can't do that. But then also, are the people who are likely to live in the countryside going to have greater exercise, more access to fresh fruit and veg? So you can't really determine whether it was due to the environment or whether it was just due to other things that they were tending to do with their lifestyle. So that was the thing I found quite hard. How do these people say, well, air pollution caused more deaths or led to a reduced life expectancy here? And basically what happens is they look at certain times in life. So I think there was the Utah steel production, there was the Dublin ban on coal, and there was a few other times where cities or countries have banned a certain thing, which is then reduced. So in the case of the Dublin coal ban, I think there was like a certain period of time, whether it was 1 year, where they couldn't burn coal and there was a ban on it. And then that means that everyone within that environment and that the city of Dublin kept the same diet, kept the same genetics and all these other things. The only thing that really changed was the production of coal and the burning of it. So then you could see, well, did any of the deaths or hospital admissions decrease or rise during them times, because nothing else has really changed? And what you would normally find is that when people had these cessations in burning certain fuels and producing air pollutants, that there was a reduction in hospital admissions and deaths, which is where we get a lot of the evidence from. So it's not a randomized controlled trial, but it has a high degree of evidence and likelihood that it was due to a certain thing. Now, I think a lot of people are aware that certain gases can cause harm. So everyone in their house potentially has a carbon monoxide meter, and that is when normally when you burn something or when you respire it, you form carbon dioxide. Carbon monoxide is worse for us as humans because once we absorb it, it goes into the bloodstream and it makes something called carboxyhemoglobin, if I've remembered that correctly. And it basically reduces the ability of your body to carry oxygen and also to release it at the site at where it needs. So then you can develop a lot of complications and death quite easily from that. So that's why we have them meters by the boiler, which is mainly the source where a lot of people will be producing these gases. But a lot of people are obviously aware of the fact that cars produced all these exhaust fumes, and this is, well, was one of the reasons as to why the tax banding for car tax, road tax involved exhaust fumes. But because now cars are more electric, we then need to find another way to make money off people. So it went back to the value of a car, which again is ridiculous. Gives you no incentive to go for an electric car. I got an electric car, but not for the environment, sadly. It was more due to the fact that you can get so much more brake horsepower for the cost. And I'll be honest, everyone thinks I'm doing it for the environment. The last two cars I've had, that's not due to performance. The point is, people are aware of these gases, but what I wasn't aware of was how they actually lead to death. So, of the deaths that are caused due to air pollution or that we can attribute to that, let's say that's one, well, it is 100%. Of that 100%, 60% of the cause of death due to air pollution was via cardiovascular disease, which is completely not what I thought. I thought it was going to be lung diseases, lung cancer, because that is the route in which we are obtaining these air pollutants. But what happens, and you will find this is a mechanism that goes throughout, is that the body doesn't really have a sensory pathway for pollution. The pollutant comes in the sense of air through the lung, goes through the alveoli, which are the little sacs of, used to think of them as like a bunch of grapes, where the blood flow of the body goes past it and then the gas exchanges there. When you are having harmful gases or things coming in, that goes into your bloodstream and then starts an inflammatory cascade, which then follows the atherosclerotic pathway that we would normally see with heart attacks. So 60% of air pollution deaths are attributed towards cardiovascular disease or done so via the cardiovascular disease route, which surprised me. But there's no good in me telling you all these things like, okay, be careful of where you're living and all these things. How can you get the most benefit? And one simple thing, I don't have it to hand because I'm recording on it, is on your iPhone or whatever, you can go into the weather app and it will come up with something called the air quality index. Now, depending on how you look at it, I know on Apple, it gives you a score of 1 to 10. And basically, it'll say the likelihood of it being harmful to you. So it'll be low, medium, high, very high. And as a person, so for me, I don't have any respiratory conditions. So I could potentially live in a high pollution area where I may not require immediate hospitalization. But once it got to very high, it would then potentially leave me more susceptible. And that's how I would use the air quality index, is on a daily basis. I mean, that is potentially overkill, but if you're staying in the same place for a week, for example, you live at home, on a weekly basis, you could just have a quick look. What is the air quality index? And what that is doing is, in the UK, for example, I think there's 206 stations where they are measuring all these pollutants. So the sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxides, ozone, which is really good once it's in the atmosphere. But when it's low down, it's a respiratory irritant. So you've got ozone, you've got carbon monoxide, you've got particulate matter of 10, 2.5, and 0.1, which I will come on to in a minute. But they measure these, and then because this station may not be within 5 miles or 10 miles of your house, what they then do is they use all traffic data. I actually think Apple uses Google's database for that, and it'll be based on Google Maps and any complaints of fires in the area or the weather on that certain day, and they will come up with a score and a likelihood of the air pollution within your local area. And in terms of guidelines and targets, the World Health Organization, you can hit or miss whether they are a feasible organization. I mean, obviously, there's the COVID thing, which I will come on to probably in future episodes, but apparently 99% of the world are living above their recommended limits of air pollution. But yeah, you can use that. So looking at your air quality index. If it's really high, then there's a good chance, well, it's probably not the best to go out there without any protection. So maybe a mask, or if it's really high, then obviously close your windows to stop it coming in. Try and have real good sealing around your windows. And that also means inside as well. When you are thinking about air pollution, it's not just outside, it's what's happening inside your house. So when you are using candles, you are using fragrances, disinfectant sprays, you are cooking on a gas stove, you've got the boiler, you've got a lot of things that are causing gases. And if you don't have proper ventilation, which is opening the windows or using an extractor hood on your cooker or using an air filtration system, then you are going to potentially increase your harm due to these air pollutants. Now, I was trying to think of where I was going with this, but with the air quality index, you've got, yeah. So I'll go on to the fact of what you should be looking out for more likely when it comes to if you are reading these profiles on an air quality index report. There is something called particulate matter 2.5. So that is a particle which is less than 2.5 microns in size. And just a comparison, the diameter of a hair, I think, is about 60 microns. So these are well within the bacteria realm. They are very small, that the usual pathways that we do to or use to eliminate such pollutants such as nose hairs, everything like that, basically where we can trap stuff and the immune system can recognize it. These are going past it. And when they're going past it, these are what are causing the irritation within the alveoli and your blood vessels. And that's what leads to the majority of the damage. And this is probably the one I would pay most attention to because, one, you cannot measure it directly by looking at it. It has to come from specialized equipment. And these are the ones that you have to take measures, probably like preventative health, where you can't see the effects until obviously something goes wrong. But what I am not saying for people to do is to go up there and go and buy all these HEPA filters and all these really high expensive things, when in reality you should be focusing on the usual things in health, like I said, diet, exercise, sleep, but keeping an eye on these. And I think the best way is just, if there's a wildfire outside, close your windows, don't go outside. If you are cooking and doing all the other things inside, make sure there's enough ventilation. I think that's the best way where you will get the best return for your time and input. I think that's what I wanted to discuss on air pollution anyway. The next one is noise pollution. Something that we don't, probably the one I don't look at the most, if I'm being honest. Like, I like listening to loud music and go to sporting events where, obviously the volume can creep up. But I think with noise pollution, it's a case of, and I didn't actually notice, that your body is actually conscious to noise even when it's asleep. And you will have a stress response even if you're not aware of a sound or you've never woken to a sound. And I think the biggest thing with noise pollution is that it's normally the effects that happens on your sleep. Yes, having high noise during the day can damage your hearing and lead to other complications. But I think from this point of view, from a preventative health longevity point of view, it is, how can you best optimize your sleep via optimizing your noise pollution. So where I live, I'm quite lucky. I don't have any real neighbors. It's backed onto a bit of a woodland. So I think we're quite lucky in terms of keeping our nighttime volume really low, which allows me to have a really good sleep. But there are a lot of people who live, for example, in New York City, for example, where you have a lot of traffic. If you ever go to New York, there's just constant beeping, bin trucks and lorries, constant noise all the time. So when you're having a restful period or you're asleep, you're potentially more conscious to all these things going on, and you are basically reacting as though it's a stressful response, which then leads to, ironically, the same type of death that happens through air pollution, which is cardiovascular disease. Again, the body is not, it has a binary system. It's stressed or it's not stressed. So in the case of noise pollution, it just produces that stressful response, which then is leading to more cardiovascular disease. Now, again, it's the recommendations for this probably seem impractical for a lot of people. So if you are going to a concert, they are advised that you put earplugs in. If you are doing certain other activities, you try and dampen out the sound, which again takes away from the enjoyment. If you are going to a concert, more than likely enough, you want to listen to it on a loud level. What's the point in going? Again, that is the point of balance in life. We're not going to live forever. And is an acute exposure to a rock concert, for example, or a sporting event going to be really detrimental down the line? Probably not. And that actually brings me on to a principle which I didn't include in air pollution, but it accounts for all three of these types of pollution on the environment's impact on your health, is the idea of area under the curve. So it's not about, obviously, acute exposures where it's really high will affect you in the acute term, can lead to lasting effects. But it's more of this idea of, if you have low level chronic exposure to air pollution, noise pollution, or light pollution, where you are not recognizing it, over a period of time, you've built a massive area under the curve, which can then lead to a lot of adverse effects and outcomes. So it's, how can you minimize that area under the curve in the best way possible, but also whilst enjoying your life, like we said. So I'm not really going to go too much into noise pollution, but a couple of things in which you can improve noise pollution, and things that you may not even have considered, is that if you've moved to a new place or you live in your current address, was there anything that kept you awake when you first moved there that you've now subconsciously blocked out without even meaning to? Because even though you can still get a good night's sleep and you blocked it out now, if it's above a certain volume, your body will still be producing a stress response. And over a long period of time, as you know, chronic low grade stress has very poor outcomes. So it would be worthwhile, on your phone, there's an app, there's numerous apps that you can get for free, where you just check the noise throughout a whole night of sleep and just see what level it is. So I believe the World Health Organization want you to have a room of about 30 decibels or below, which is very quiet. But you can at least see how close you get down to that. And again, I think the World Health Organization, when you actually look at all these pollution criteria, are quite far away from what is happening in reality. So I don't know what you're going to do with that. But a good one is to audit your current environment now. Are there ways in which you can dampen out the noise? So if you are doing manual labor or daily activities that have a lot of noise inputs, can you use headphones? Should you be using headphones, earplugs? So family members, for me, using power tools, they should be using earplugs. But usually, due to convenience, they're not. I'm probably guilty of this as well when I work with them. I think that's the best place to start. Again, some people use earplugs when they go to sleep, but then I also have that fear of, well, you should always be alert for anyone who's potentially breaking into your house or anything that goes on if your phone's going due to an emergency and you can't hear it. So there's always a trade-off. Yes, you may get a better sleep, but then something bad can happen on the other side. So again, it's all about balance it for you. But you can dampen certain things, such as having really good curtains and soundproofing in your room for a good night's sleep. And that's where the majority of the benefits of noise pollution reduction come from, is improving your sleep to reduce that stress response. Now, the last thing, or the last category, is light pollution. Now, this one's a bit different in the respect that we can actually see light. And light is not that bad, in the sense that if you wake up in the morning, we want you to have direct light. We want you to get that into your eyes, and that's because it will regulate your circadian classic term everyone loves to use when they want to try and talk about sleep as if they know what's going on. And yeah, that's what you should be doing. When it comes to light pollution, the issue is that we're having too much light overnight, and that is what is disrupting sleep. Again, noise and light share a lot of things with sleep, and I've said this numerous times, it is still one of the most fundamental things that not many people respect, probably me included. And it's something that we've never been able to out evolve throughout the whole of humanity. So the idea is that if you can make your room as dark as possible, so blackout curtains, whether it's no tellies, no lights, and a lot of people go towards these blue light blockers, which, yeah, they potentially do help. I mean, blue light in its own right isn't that problematic. It's just because it's usually being used more of a nighttime, which is then disrupting the release of melatonin, which is then stopping you from having a proper sleep. But my issue is if you're using blue light blockers to still use your laptop or phone overnight, you're then being counterproductive because ideally you should be trying to rest and try and put your brain into a form of relaxation. When you are still on these modes of inputs, you are actively stimulating your brain for other things. So I don't think there's any need in getting blue light blockers. You should just don't have your phone or telly or laptop to hand when you're going to bed, at least within 30 minutes. I know it's hard, especially if you work and you've got your own business and you want to try and do things, but I think a grace period of at least 30 minutes where before bed, try and remove all these things that are going to disrupt you from having a decent night's sleep. Now, yeah, I think that's generally it. There's loads of things you can go into in these, and you can go into the studies, and this has a relative risk ratio of 1.08. The bottom line is that these are all present. Not many people pay attention to them because once you live somewhere, you feel as though, well, there's nothing I can do. And there are things you can do, but largely, the air that you breathe is not governed by you. And that is why I say it doesn't move the needle as much with regards to your health in comparison to the other things I've mentioned. And that is where you should put the majority of your time. If you have all your other things, such as your diet, your exercise, sleep, stress management, all locked in, essentially, or as optimized as you possibly can, then it would be worthwhile investing in maybe air filtration systems. Could be really good noise cancelling headphones. It could be really good light blocking curtains to make your room more susceptible to sleep overnight. That's when you would start investing in them areas, but not until you've sorted the other things. And there's always the classic person who'll focus on, I don't red light therapy or air filtration system and still be, I don't 40 kilos overweight and not do any exercise whatsoever. So their priorities are completely mixed up at a large scale. So that is what I would say. Only come onto these in high amounts of investment once you've optimized everything there. But there are things that you can do for basically free. Like I said, just a lot of these are common sense. Don't have your telly on for too late or your phone on before going to bed. Make sure that your environment isn't as noisy as it should be. And when it's air pollution or quality, if it's smoking outside or the sky is green, maybe don't go out. Or if you are, use a mask. And then if it's really bad inside and you're using all these chemicals, then try and let the air out. And I think that is common sense. One thing I actually wanted to mention on light was that I think 60% of Europe cannot see the Milky Way because of light pollution from cities and villages. And we've become so accustomed to how light these areas are overnight. So I always wonder at what level or how much you would see an improvement in your sleep if you were to just reside to the countryside for maybe 2 months, where obviously light pollution isn't really a thing. I would always be curious to see that. Now, the question I made, or was it a question, a statement, a hook, whatever you want to call it, at the very beginning of the episode, that is true. And again, it's stats having a play on words. So air pollution on average reduces the life expectancy of the globally average person. So again, not really someone in the West because we tend to be quite good at it. This again is because, like I said, China, India, a lot of countries where they don't really have any regulations and are pumping out a lot of industrial fumes, you reduce your life expectancy by 1.9 years. When the average person, and again, this is the play on words, not every person smokes, probably about 10% of the population do. So when you average that out across people who are non-smokers, it works out at 1.6 years lost due to smoking. And that includes me. So I'm not a non-smoker. I'm a non-smoker. And their averages passed on to me, if you understand what I'm saying here. If you weighed up smoking versus air pollution, hands down, smoking would kill you 20, 30, 40 times faster. The evidence is there, clear cut, hazard ratio in the tens. So I'm not saying go and smoke, it's safer than the air pollution, but I just wanted to bring it up because it's quite a, this is how stats and all these studies work. You can always find something that manipulates your factor or the thing that you're looking into being a bit more favorable. I hope this one was of use. I just felt it just sort of covers everything. We don't really look at the environments, like I said, because we feel as though we probably have a lack of control over it. But there are simple things that we can do here. And ironically, when I picked this one to film or record yesterday, or on Saturday, I worked with my dad, and he's a builder, landscaper, and randomly one of the vehicles went on fire. And obviously all this ash and soot come into the air. And I'm thinking, after looking at this now, I expose myself to all them things. So that is quite a hard thing to control. And it is just more common sense than being data driven. And I think that's the note that I'm going to end on this. Anything we've discussed, as always, is not medical advice. It's for informational purposes only. If you are having any issues with regards to any of these types of pollutants, then try and obviously remove it yourself. And if there is still an issue, then it might be worth going for secondary assessments if you can get into an appointment with whoever is your physician. If you've got this far, thanks for listening and watching. Any suggestions for the next episode, leave them below, and I will see you in the next one.